So, welcome to this Livestock Antimicrobial Partnership webinar. We are a part of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, and we are launching this from the FAO headquarters here in Rome, and we are grateful for the FAO support for that. My name is Ulf Magnusson. I'm the coordinator of the Livestock Antimicrobial Partnership, LAMP. And in my everyday life, I'm a professor at the Department of Clinical Sciences at SLU in Sweden. As most of you know, the GASL is a consensus-based and genuinely multi-stakeholder creation with about 120 member organizations from intergovernmental organizations, governments, the industry, livestock industry, NGOs, academia, research institute, CSOs, etc. And this makes us very well positioned for deal with livestock issues where there are different perspectives or opinions, and perhaps antimicrobial use and resistance might be such a one. Previously, the LAMP arranged a webinar on antimicrobial use in livestock in low-income countries. Today, we move to another setting, the high-end producers, and we will continue to arrange webinars like this with different thematic settings, so to say, so we can have a focused discussions as the conditions and also the options are very different in different settings. This webinar, for your information, will be recorded or is recorded right now, and it will be available for you to watch on the GASL website. So as a starting point or a recap, resistance by microbes to antimicrobials make these pharmaceuticals useless and threatens the animal health, of course, welfare and productivity. And so we really must protect their efficiency. In addition, of course, also you all have heard about that the resistance in bacteria or other bugs in livestock or animals may move to humans. So it's a threat to the public health as well. However, it must be mentioned that we don't know the magnitude of that transition, but still it's very important to take on it's global wisdom, I would say, that we take on One Health approach when we are dealing with the issue of antimicrobial resistance. As a starting point, to put it straightforward, the more antimicrobials we use, the more resistance do we get. And currently, more than half of all antimicrobials in the world are used in the livestock sector. And this high proportion is mainly due to that still in some countries, antimicrobials are used for growth promotion, even though it's a declining practice. We have solid data from the VOA about that in their annual reports, which is a good sign. And also we are using, or in some settings, we are using antimicrobials regularly on a preventive basis. And these two practices are not present in the public health sector or in the health sector. So that's mainly the reason why there is such a higher proportion in the livestock sector rather than in human medicine. So with these words, I will hand over or ask for a presentation of the participants here, and then we could start. So on my right hand side here is Sandra Nordborg, please.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Sandra and I'm a veterinarian. And besides working with LAMP, I also do research on AMR in poultry in Vietnam at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. But my role here today is to facilitate the Q&A sessions, and we will have 2 of those. So the instructions for this is they are simple. If you want to ask a question, please write in the Q&A function and not in the chat. And begin by introducing yourself. And also, if you want to direct your question to a specific panelist, please state that. And then I will forward the questions to our panel. And hopefully we will have enough time to answer all of your questions. But with that, I leave the floor to the rest of the panel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shin Huang, and I'm Secretary General at the International Meat Secretariat. The International Meat Secretariat, or the IMS, is a private sector non-profit organization. We are trade progressive and we are science-based. And we are science-based in the sense that the niche we are trying to fill is the interface between the intergovernmental organizations that are studying the science, and in today's discussion for antimicrobial resistance, the key international organizations are the Food and Agriculture Organization, who is hosting this discussion today, the World Organization for Animal Health, or WOA, as our chair just mentioned earlier, based in Paris, France, and the World Health Organization. And most recently, we also have the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, that has joined the quadripartite. And so just if there's one thing I want you to remember from my introduction is that the role, at least from my organization perspective, is to be the interface between our national, local producer associations to the international organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Shin. Rory?
Hi, I'm Rory Peter. I am the Executive Director of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. We have member organizations in 24 different countries and 12 national and regional roundtables representing the beef industry on all of the continents, with the exception of Antarctica. And we set sustainability principles, criteria, and goals, and these cover the full gamut of issues that the beef industry is involved with, environmental, social, and economic, to ensure that beef can remain part of a thriving food system well into the future. So antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial use is clearly an important issue within that sustainability discussion, and one which we first produced an antimicrobial stewardship statement and guidance in 2018 for our members, also allied with the then OIE, now World Organization for Animal Health, on this issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Rory, Nicola.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Nicola Cinotti. I'm a veterinarian by training, and I'm the Secretary General of the International Poultry Council, or IPC. The IPC is the global association of the poultry meat industry. IPC represents 29 countries and 55 companies operating on the entire poultry meat value chain. As my colleague just said, IPC represents the interface between the private sector, both in terms of companies and association, and international organizations such as the OIE. I'm sorry, I will never get used to the WOA, the OIE, the FAO, the WTO, and the WHO. As producing association, I'm sorry, poultry industry has always shown particular interest and awareness of the AMR and AU issues, and IPC has been part of the Codex Alimentarius Task Force on AMR for years, until 2019. I think it's the last meeting they had physically in South Korea, because we recognize that AMR, it's an issue our industry is part of, and it's an issue our industry is absolutely part of the solution. So it's not topic for the industry, it's something that the poultry industry, both at national and global level, has been working for a while. So we are pleased to be here with the FAO and with you to discuss what we are doing collectively to trying to find a solution to AMR.
Thank you so much indeed. And then online we have Caroline Emmond from IDF. Please, Caroline.
Hello, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be with you in Rome today. I'm very happy to be with you. So my name is Caroline Emmond. I'm the Director General of the International Dairy Federation. So IDF has been the global dairy expertise since 1903. So we bring together dairy experts from around the world, including dairy farmers, dairy processor, academic researcher, everybody involved in the value chain of dairy from 39 countries, representing 74% of the milk production. And our objective is really to help nourish the world with the safe and sustainable dairy. The dairy sector is aware of the risk of the spread of antimicrobial resistance and has taken actions. The sector has adopted an integrated supply chain management approach, requiring positive action and cooperation by all participants, dairy farmers, veterinarian, dairy and meat processing company, pharmaceutical company, and regulators. IDF has a standard committee on farm management, as well as a standing committee on animal health and welfare, where we actually carry most of the work that we'll be talking about today. So thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. But since we have you online here, or in picture, so to say, starting with you with one of today's questions, which issue in your branch of the livestock production, which issue do you find the most challenging in the AMR context? Which is the worst challenge or most challenging thing, if I put it like that? What do you think?
Yes, thank you. For us in the dairy sector, the antimicrobial agents are used generally in dairy for individual treatment of certain infection disease. And as you know, in the dairy sector, the main disease is called mastitis. That is the main disease in the sector. And that's why we are actually focusing a lot of our work on that topic. We do organize every 3 to 4 years, actually, a special conference on the latest science on mastitis to make sure that everybody is aware of the latest information, so we can make sure that we address it directly, because it is our approach to address with very careful use of antibiotics as needed, at the time needed, and no longer.
Thank you. Indeed. Nicolo, in the poultry sector, if you pick one issue, which is your priority or worst challenge?
I would go for something different, not an issue which is intrinsic of the AMR itself, but something more related to the process. So the key is to ensure that we are taking science-based risk analysis approach to be sure that we are applying resources where we really need them and where we can really have the greatest impact. There are a lot of resources at company level, at national level, at global level that are invested on AMR and MU. So to me, the key is to be sure that we are investing those resources in order to achieve the best result possible. And we can leverage those resources for align all countries at the same level, at least of awareness of the issue.
Do the so-called precautionary principle have a role in that kind of risk assessment?
For sure it does, yeah.
Okay. Rory, in your sector or branch, which is the most burning?
In terms of diseases and so on, that will vary very much from country to country in terms of what antimicrobials are being used and in terms of the levels of resistance that are being seen. But what I see as an issue really for all of us probably is the fact that there are shared class antimicrobials which are critical for human health, which are also critical for animal health. And that is where we really get into a difficult discussion about what's the priority use of this drug and who gets to use it, because once a drug becomes ineffective, none of us can use it. And it's clearly important to livestock health that we have these tools and are able to continue using them. Therefore, it's very much in our own interest to make sure that antimicrobial resistance, once it emerges, and that's inevitable, is not going to spread. So we must have containment, we must have surveillance, and we must understand where it's coming from. So my issue is really one of understanding, maybe a little bit the same way as Nicolo mentioned, that where is emergence of resistance, and are we making sure that we're containing that as early as possible so that these drugs remain effective for all of us.
Thank you, Ruri. Chin, what is your thinking?
Well, I, of course, agree very much with my colleagues have already said, but let me try to come to a more general level about antimicrobial use, because at least in my association, which is covering ruminants, monogastrics, the red meat sector, very different production systems, also in very many different countries, different types of climate were affected. Many of the animals are outdoors, so affected by weather, etc. But just the need to have this balance between the right balance, and that's different for everyone, between the economic goals, the animal welfare goals, the animal health goals, and this right balance, the appropriate balance that gives us the outcome that we want, that as a society we agree to in terms of the product that we produce, the way we produce it. And let's not forget that, the reason we are using antimicrobials is to improve the health of our animals. And the reason we want to improve the health of our animals is not only for animal welfare reasons. This is what is asked of us as societies. This is what producers instinctively want to do, but this is also good for profit. These do not need to be mutually exclusive. It's only when you overuse or misuse through, because of lack of knowledge or whatever reason that we can discuss later, then that you get into a problem. And then just very quickly about this very, very critical aspect of surveillance and also making sure that the use of antimicrobials, animals and humans, that there's as little overlap as possible so that we can keep the critical ones for each respective side. I just want to say that we as organizations have all been, from the beginning, from 2003, I believe, with the international organizations discussing these lists of antimicrobials essential for animal husbandry. And then that is basically being organized by the FAO and the OIE. And the list of antimicrobials essential for human health, which is essentially being organized by the WHO, but everybody is working together to look at the overlap and then to see how we minimize the overlap. And this minimization of the overlap, we have had this discussion since 2007 at the international level. Yes.
Thank you all. I distill this issue of risk assessment to get the right balance, and that is, I guess it's a never-ending discussion. And Caroline very specifically targeted a specific disease and how to prevent that, because it's so obvious that it's the mastitis issue in the dairy sector that is the biggest user of antimicrobials. But coming back to you, Caroline, you work in many different countries, like our colleagues here at the table. Do you see a lot of differences in attitudes or challenges or opportunities between countries, and why so, if that's the case, in the control or the curbing of the antimicrobial resistance? Please, Caroline.
Thank you. It's an interesting question because the answer is not easy. It's yes and no. First, I think that as a sector, we do have a clear common approach. And Sin mentioned it earlier, that at the end of the day, what we care about is the health of the animal. So that's why we're doing all of that. So we emphasize a lot on the disease prevention and the care of the animal. So it's by developing, like we have a guidelines on health and welfare, for example. And then each of the countries then can use those and apply to their own reality, because obviously farming in the US and in India is different. But at the end of the day, the animal is similar and the risk of disease is similar. The challenge of training and educating the stakeholders in the value chain are similar. So I think a lot of the work we do globally help to give the tools for then the country to apply in their different realities. So yes, there are differences, but at the end of the day, I think it's important to align on what we're trying to achieve. And when we explain that, whenever the country we are, when we explain that actually what's important is to have healthy animals so you can have quality milk and animals that will be producing like efficiently, the right quality with less impact on the planet and the resource and good value for the farmers. When you have, an explanation of the why we're doing all of that, it makes sense for many people. After that is just making sure they've got the tool to implement it in their country. But I've been in Africa, what I've seen actually they've translated in kind of a illustrated book on action that can be made by farmers to facilitate and prevent disease at the cow level and particularly at the mammal level. So I think that every country is able to adapt the tools to share the message that we have globally. But at the end of the day, I feel we're all pushing in the same direction. I don't feel that anybody is going to go in a different direction, but how they do it could be a little bit different or adapted of the way we're trying to promote globally. So it's a yes and no answer. So it's not that clear, but I couldn't go straightforward on this one.
But thank you. But if I ask you, I do understand from a producer's organization's perspective, it's mainly the same or a similar approach technically, if I put it like that. But there are different legalizations, regulations. There are different consumers awareness or pressure, if you want to say it. Do you handle these two other forces in differently, or is it the same approach, or what is your take on that? Do you see what I'm trying to say?
I do, and I don't know if it's the same thing for every sector, but I know that for the dairy sector, we're usually not driven by a regulation. Usually the sector is ahead and have been self-regulated for many years. So regulation, legislation being different in different countries, for me, it's not too much of an influence because at the end of the day, what makes a difference is that every farmers in every country and every processing company are interested in the same thing, is to get safe and quality milk. And in order to get that safe and quality milk, animal health is important. So at the end of the day, wherever the regulation is, wherever the pressure is coming from the consumer, I would say at this point of time in the world, it is a general issue well spread, and it has some differences in terms of regulation, but I don't feel it has a major impact on the ground. I think everybody understands what needs to be done, and they just need to find a way to do it. And obviously it's in constant evolution. We look at the science and we see the latest and how we can do better and when we improve. But I don't see as much difference as maybe it could be in other sector, but maybe my colleagues will have a different approach. But in my opinion, I've traveled in many countries, I've made presentation in many countries. And when you explain that everything is linked together, and if you want to have safe, quality, commercially viable operation, at the end of the day, the quality, the safety, and the animal welfare is all important.
Yeah, I mean, in the dairy sector, as you continuously deliver or produce milk, you have a kind of self-regulating phenomenon there, that you have to take care of the withdrawal times and the residues continuously. So it's kind of inbuilt in the production system compared to if you raise animals for slaughter. that's a slight different. Shin, disagree, please.
No, not to disagree, but just to say that, look, you know, we also have, because we're producing animals for meat after all, and indeed that there are very, very well-defined protocols for withdrawal times to ensure that by the time the product reaches the consumer, that the levels of antimicrobials are down at levels that have been proven by science to be safe. And these depend, of course, on the regulatory mechanisms that are different in different countries. And I just want to make the distinction between a global standard, which I think is a necessary thing for us all to be aiming towards. And these are defined by principally the World Organization for Animal Health. They are the global body. They have member countries from, I believe, well, nearly 200 countries in the world. That's practically every country in the world. So it really is truly a global body. They are setting the global standard, and we are, and there is a global strategy. After that, that global strategy can be adapted to national plans, depending on the national circumstances. And then these are in turn disseminated to the local producer associations. This is where an organization like the International Meat Secretariat can help, because we are connected with most of the global associations, the producer associations, the processors, etc. And so all of this works through the system in a predicted, not regulatory, but in a predicted, reasonable, scientific, orderly fashion. And that's how that's managed.
Yeah. What I meant, if you're a dairy producer, you lose money as soon as you use antibiotics or antimicrobials because you can't deliver milk. Whereas if you are a pig producers, for instance, you can treat your piglets and so well in advance before slaughter time when the withdrawal. So it's I think it's more inherited in the dairy sector that it's self-regulating if we are going for reducing the use of antibiotics. But it's from the safety aspects, it's perfectly safe, of course, to
and not only that, let me just add, you know, I'm sorry, I want to give others a chance to speak. Antimicrobials and other medicines are expensive, and no rational producer will use more than what is necessary. Yeah, so if he's well educated and knows the dose that he needs, that's what he's likely going to use without anybody having to regulate anything for him. Okay.
If I turn to you, Rory, the public awareness on a global scale and the consumers' pressure or attitudes. So do you see a lot of different, you're operating in many different countries. Do you see a lot of differences there? And is this a force that you really have to take into account as a producers organization?
I think it's, I'm trying to face the camera so that people there can see.
But that's fine.
I think it's important that we reassure consumers that what we are doing is well based in science and that it is the right thing to be doing in terms of animal welfare, in terms of the production system, and in terms of avoiding the spread of antimicrobial resistance. So consumer, communication is important, but if I were to think about that more as responding to pressure, I don't think that's the appropriate way for us to work. We need to be sure that we're basing things on the scientific material available and that we respond in a rational manner to what science tells us. That's really difficult in today's environment because the rise of social media, the rise of hysterical headlines has really led to an issue where people are reactive to almost anything that becomes a major story or goes viral. Of course, as we know, viruses are not something we can treat with antimicrobials, and that is the sort of things that could become an issue in the consumer's mind, and did become an issue when, for example, we had the emergence of COVID. People started talking about the role of livestock in this, when clearly we know that the disease didn't emerge from livestock species, and they did not play a significant role in that pandemic at all. So we need to be careful how we respond to consumers. We need to provide the right information, and we need to make sure that the science is available that supports that. We know that most people won't spend a lot of time trying to understand that. A lot of people are responding in a knee-jerk fashion, and there's not really a lot that we can do about that other than make sure that we're consistent and scientific.
Oh, yeah, it sounds wise. Nicolo, one of the misunderstandings or confusions is that people are or consumers and the public are confusing the risk of residues with the development of antimicrobial resistance. I mean, the development of antimicrobial resistance is about how we raise the animals, and it's a super difficult message to convey, I think, to the consumers. Do you agree on that? Or
I absolutely do. And building on what Rory just said, which I absolutely support and endorse every single word that Rory said. But the problem is that sometimes I feel we are fighting a really hard fight. You mentioned antimicrobial residues, and trying to let people understand what's residues and how the AMR and YAMRL are calculated and why that is 100% safe. That's pretty tough. First of all, because most of the time people they don't want to listen to your explanation. They have a preset mind, as Rory said, built by historical messages. So if you are eating chicken or beef or pork, you are eating antibiotics. But this is not the case. Even when you have 0.1 ppb of residues, that is not antibiotic, it's residues, which is a different thing. So communicating scientific principle to consumer, it's difficult. Sometimes it might be dangerous because people have the feeling that when you are telling them something they do not understand, because probably they are lawyers or they don't have a scientific background, you're just trying to fool them, to take advantage of them. So it's really complicated. So it's very important that the private sector and public institution organization like the World Organization for Animal Health when it comes to animal welfare and animal health, or the Codex Alimentarius when it comes to food safety, work together to let people know that a company could not wake up and decide and do whatever they want. There are rules, and those rules are for the consumer well-being, and people working in the industry are consumers as well. I'm eating the same chicken that you all and the people listening and watching this webinar are eating. So it's in our interest to provide nationally and globally people with good, high quality, affordable and nutritious food. And if I want to go back, if I may, 1 second on Caroline's points, and when you asked the question, I was about to say, yes, of course, there are differences. But then listening to Caroline's train of thought, that was really interesting. And actually, she's right. There are differences, but the differences are more on the starting point in the process, because fighting AMR, it's a process. It's a never, I hope, ending one day, but it's a long process. And someone is ahead, someone other is behind, someone started earlier, some other later, somewhere there are more resources than some other places. But I think that working in global association, what we all do, it's try not to focus on the differences, trying to focus on commonalities that we have globally in order to build that pre-competitive global agenda. And so it's important to realize that we have commonalities in awareness. At least I talk from my industry, poultry industry, the level of awareness globally on AMR, it's really high. The commonality is the awareness that we need a leadership from the private sector. We cannot wait for the public institution to do all the work. We have to do something voluntarily on a private sector level. And the third point, and this I'm sure I'm talking about poultry industry, is the vertically integrated sector. Poultry industry is fully vertically integrated, and this allows every single player in the market to have the full control of every single phase. And when it comes to data collection or understanding how use or management of veterinary medicine are handled at farm level. This is very important, and my experience with the Italian poultry industry, that has been a really a key factor.
May I ask, you mentioned commonalities here. Do you see, I mean, you're representing both egg producers and broiler producers.
No, I'm sorry, I stop you here. We have a sister organization for the eggs, which is the International Egg Commission.
So you're not doing eggs.
We are dealing only with poultry meat. I'm sorry. I can give it a shot, but
Sandra, do we have some comments or questions from the audience?
We do have a few questions and also a comment, and I can start with a question from Brian Perry, and you have already touched a bit upon this, but maybe someone wants to elaborate about this. He says that you have strong representation from the main international commodity groups and the international organizations. We categorize global production systems into the worried well, the hot spots, and the cold spots. With the development of livestock commodity demand, all three of them exist in many low and middle income countries. How do your different international groups interface with national level policies on AMR? I don't know.
Anyone?
Well, let me give that briefly a shot. I think there are a couple of answers to that. First, I want to really emphasize again the important role of the international organizations, because they are the ones that are basically touching every country, every livestock producing country in the world. And so that is in response to the question about those in, the worried, or I'm not sure the terminology, but basically in developing countries or in other situations, smallholder producers, et cetera. The other thing is that the global agenda for livestock here at FAO, this multi-stakeholder platform, is exactly about bringing in some of these other stakeholder groups. And it is about bringing them in so that they can bring their point of view, their concerns, and also have that interface with some of us are here around the table from the more established organizations. So I just want to say that, from the global agenda perspective, we are welcoming all of these different inputs. And certainly as organizations, I'm not pretending to represent every livestock producing situation in the world. I don't think any of my colleagues would dare do that either, but we certainly welcome to have that discussion with them as part of the global agenda.
Yeah, I hope I made that clear to all on the web here, that we've had on a similar meeting like this with a focus on low income countries, and this is the high-end producers day, if I put it like that. However, I also read in my dear friend Brian Perry's question here, how the interface, how do you relate to the legalization and so on, and development in low income countries. Do you have a take on that, Caroline? On Brian, maybe Sandra could repeat the final question there, or maybe you have a better memory than I do, Caroline, and can answer straight ahead. Please.
I would probably just make a clarification though on your last comment. I know that from IDF point of view, we represent all farming system from all different continents of the planet. And there's no distinction between small farmers and what you consider the I don't know how you put it out. We represent all type of farming. So India is one of our actually main dynamic members, and they have like 2 cows per farmer. So I don't think we should make that distinction. And partly when we have a discussion like that about AMR and animal health and welfare, I think it is the cross-inspiration with having all those countries around the table that makes an impact. It is because those low-income countries are actually at the same table than other type of farming system, and that they could see the importance of different aspects and work on them and learn from others. So I would say that this table does represent as many as the small farmers that we have on the other aspect. As part of Brian's question, I would say that the role of global organization is to work with international organization and with global stakeholders. What we do is that we equip our member to have discussion with their national government, but we do not interact with national government. It's not our role, it's not our mandate. It is our members' organization that will do it. In their own country, they know their sector, and they will do the representation that needs to be done in their country to align all of that. But what we do as a global organization, as I said earlier, we've developed guidelines on animal health and welfare. We have animal health report that we publish regularly to give example of what's happening in different countries. So we play our role of sharing knowledge and expertise so that they can play it in the national level. But it's not for us as global organization to play that role at the national level.
Okay, thank you so much. Rory, do you want to comment on Brian's?
Yeah, I mean, my answer would be very similar to Caroline's. We set up our statement and guidelines on antimicrobial stewardship to make sure there is consistency across all of the countries, whether they're wealthy, industrialized, or lower and middle income countries. There is some discrepancy between national level policies and national level surveillance. And the reason that the beef industry and GRSB specifically chose to produce a guideline in line with the OIE was just to make sure that in those countries where there may be less government supervision, that we were providing that consistency across our member nations.
Okay, thank you. Do we have some more?
Yes, Brian also had a follow-up question of how well the groups represented collaborate with the Fleming Fund capacity building initiatives.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need to touch upon that.
Yeah.
And how well the different commodity groups communicate.
Do you have a common club? A secret Facebook group or something like that?
We meet for pizza in Rome.
No, but seriously, do you have some interactions?
Well, let me just say that I always appreciate, just before going to an FAO meeting or a Codex Alimentarius meeting, I always appreciate having a call with my colleagues in the International Poultry Council, the International Dairy Federation, the International Feed Industry Federation, to have our discussion, or with Rory at the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Depends on the issue, of course, but I always appreciate these very helpful preparatory meetings that we have amongst ourselves, if you like. So if the question was about collaboration amongst us, I think absolutely it's in our interests. We're not competitors here.
I think it's also important to define the role of the global association when it comes to the FAO or the OIE or the Codex Alimentarius. We are the so-called observers.
Yes.
So we basically are allowed to sit at the table. We are allowed to have an opinion.
Yeah.
We are not always allowed to express that opinion because you have to wait for all the delegates to talk, and then you have to wait and wait in line. So it's funny because sometimes when I talk to people, they look at global association as we are the specter, we are deciding what is going on globally. Absolutely, that is not the case. We are, at least as IPC, we are not talking with national governments.
No.
We just have regular discussion with the international organization we have mentioned thousands of times today, in the OIE and the FAO, on the topics that are discussed in that moment, and having a common understanding among sector about what is going on and how the sectors is reacting. Could be a lesson learned, although the sector is different from yours. I mean, poultry industry is completely different from dairy or from beef, but that doesn't mean that there is a lesson learned that could save me hundreds of meetings and hours of discussion just by knowing what Rory or what Shin or what Caroline or Alexandra, IDF, or my colleague in the egg industry are doing. So, I mean, we are colleagues, so we talk to each other.
You're pre-competitive.
Absolutely.
No
one is pre-competitive than us.
No one can be more pre-competitive than we are, okay? That's our competitive statement.
We have some more.
Yes, we do. We have here a question from Sofia Bokvist at SLU, and she says that there are large global actors and organizations working to reduce the use of antimicrobials and mitigate AMR. There is also a lot of knowledge on these issues at academia and at universities, at both local and regional stake. Do you see there are enough collaborations between these actors to enable global actions to trickle down to local context?
Do you like universities? Do you like research?
I think that is really an excellent question, and I think really put your finger on the nub of the issue. Is that a lot of things are being done. So it's useful to ask the questions, but are we all aware of what's being done, and are we putting it all together in a way that we're maximizing the value of that? And I wish I had an answer to that, but my suspicion is that maybe we are not, for example, taking into account enough the work of academics and the private sector companies. Certainly in private sector companies, there are financial interests involved, and for example, in my association, we do not have any influence over certain multinationals, so it is not our role. But I mean, the point is that there is valuable information there that we could all learn from if we could more freely speak to each other. And are the existing mechanisms enough to assure that? And if I had to guess, I would like to optimistically guess that we can always do better. Let's put it that way.
Thank you, Shane. Caroline, IDF is very proactive in policies and recommendations and guidelines and so forth. Its member, do you have a mechanism for digging up the newest research news or so, or how do you operate regarding this?
Yeah, and when I heard the question, I know I have to say, no, we always can do better. But to be honest, I really feel we are doing good, actually. And so I would give two parts. The first part, the way we do it at IDF, the way our organization work is that we bring experts from different countries around the world to work on specific topics. So we build specific team of experts to collaborate on projects. So when we work on the guidelines on health, animal health and welfare, then we have academic experts, we have farmers, we have farm managers. We bring expertise that is already multi-stakeholders in the way we do our work. So do we take into account enough the academic? Academic is key to what we do every day at IDF. So my answer is yes, we're taking that into consideration. And as I say, we organize specific conference on mastitis every 3 to 4 years. And we actually even next week, we have a IDF Dairy World Dairy Summit. We have a specific side event in junction with the IDF and FAO on AMR and innovative approach on treating AMR. So, it is a topic, honestly, as an organization, I don't feel we could do more in terms of reach out and collaboration. I think globally, I would say that, and then it's my personal opinion, I'm very fond of the One Health approach. I like this umbrella because it brings a lot of people under it and could be a good way of consolidating information. So it feels to me that the One Health approach is a good way to have a good perspective on what's happening. I know that OIE, and now it changed the name, and for me too, I just can't pronounce this one, WOHA. I was told we need to do a pause in between, WOHA. And they've been very active on the work on AMR. Every year we used to have conference on the topic, and we had big event, and we all share a table. I remember in Morocco to talk about AMR. So it is a topic that is well discussed and collaborating. And I'm sorry to say that I don't feel that I think we're doing good actually right now.
Okay, message taken. Thank you. Do we have some more?
Yes, we do. We have a question from Mwenda Mbaka, who's a veterinarian and also a champion for enhanced animal welfare as a resource against AMR, who's asking, the food systems we have in developed countries and currently taking root in the developing countries have two driving forces: economics and the need to cater for the increasing demand for food in an increasing global population. The same systems are associated with poor animal welfare and hence a huge demand for antimicrobials. What are the practical approaches to balance the two forces of a demand for increased production and hence the increased demand of antimicrobials? It's a big question.
Anyone?
I can take that one. I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question, actually. So I'm going to question it. Yeah, I'm going to question it. If we go back to my comment initially, what I've mentioned, we're doing a lot of work on prevention of disease and focusing on animal health and welfare. And as I said, we're linking the efficiency, the productivity level, the animal health, the quality, and the safety. It's all one big element. So because we're focusing a lot on the need to understand how to improve productivity, and every time I'm in India and Africa, I emphasize on that, and I show them graph to see how their productivity could benefit from improvement if you compare to other countries. And there's many elements that we know that can help that productivity, and one of it is definitely health and animal welfare. Breeding is another one, animal nutrition is another one. So there's several elements that people can use to improve that productivity. And as I said, I'm challenging the premises that the only way to improve productivity is to go to antibiotics. That's as I can only talk for what I know, but from what I know and what I know in the dairy sector, as I said, antibiotic is used to control disease. And as you said earlier, the milk is taken out of the system during that period. So in our case, I have difficulty to make that direct link of increasing antibiotic. It's not the case in the dairy sector. Let's put it that way.
Just follow up to that. When you are dealing with the mastitis, what is your approach in general? Just to explain to the audience, what is your approach to reduce the need or so for antibiotics when it comes to mastitis?
First, I'll start with a disclaimer. I'm not a vet and I'm not an AMR specialist. Okay, so that being said, as I said earlier, it's really in terms of prevention. And we all know that if you make sure the cow is healthy and you have indicators, in the dairy sector, we use as well a lot of sensors. So there's protocol where we actually need to check the health of the animal. So you can distinguish the signals before it's too late, because actually there are some signals that you can detect, so that you won't have to treat with antibiotics because you've seen it in advance, and then you can prevent it from getting worse. So there's a lot of things that could be done in terms of prevention, and if the farmers is focused on animal health and welfare, then it's going to check the cows and it's going to see if the cow's getting sick or not, and then it can take the action that needs to be taken. And that's why we're having, as I said, this conference every 4 years, 3 to 4 years, to see what's the latest science. What have we learned recently? Is there any new signals? Is there new treatment? Is there different treatment? Interestingly, since I've mentioned we're having a meeting in India next week, in our session on AMR, we actually do have a colleague from India that will be talking about the herbal medicine using the treatment of cows. So there's different things that are happening out there that we need to look at. And as we've said earlier, we're all science-based organization, but there's different things that can be done and are being done in making sure that we do the best job possible in reducing the use of antibiotics. But one thing is for sure, if we know there's a disease, not treating it will not be taking care of an animal. So we have to be very clear on that, that it needs to be reduced, but needs to be done for the health of the animal as well.
Yeah. Sorry for putting you in this examination position. You passed very well the vet student test on this. I think that is an important message, overall message, that we should work for disease prevention without using antibiotics and just using it when we really need. And I think the mastitis business or issue, if I say so. There are very good examples on that, how you by prevention have managed to reduce the need for antibiotics. Tin, you wanted to come back to this as well.
No, I just, well, I mean, first, I want to thank Caroline for bringing up the point that indeed that we also look for, and we also like to promote research for alternatives to antimicrobials. So, in situations where there is another treatment that is as efficient, why not? Let's do that. But I want to also, admit that I am not a veterinarian, but I want to recognize, celebrate the importance of veterinarians and the importance of the systems of veterinary services in different countries. And not all countries are lucky enough to have a very well-performing system. And so I just want to make the point, because the question was also about, well, how do we avoid some of the mistakes that have been made in developed countries? And there have been mistakes. I challenge anybody to give me an industry where you have not made mistakes in modern life. There have been mistakes, and we would like to correct those. How do we prevent some of those mistakes in developing countries? And I think one of the things that is really crucial, one of the crucial things we must support organizations like the OIE, the WOAH, World Organization for Animal Health. They have this performance of veterinary services, these missions evaluation that they send to different countries, specifically countries that are in need of such services, to do an evaluation, exactly that, to find solutions to the problems that exist. We also have this worldwide database, World Animal Health Information System, also hosted at WOA. This is called the WAHES. I'm sorry to throw all these acronyms out at you, because if you don't have statistics, and if you're not basing your information on true knowledge, then you are behind in the game. So you want to measure performance, you need to be able to measure it. So these are very important things, and and so I just want to make a plug to support financially, morally our international institutions in this very important aspect. Not all countries are able to have a well-performing veterinary service, and we absolutely need that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Rory, do you agree on that it's an inevitable development if you increase production or productivity, that we have to use more antibiotics, which was the kind of precondition for this question?
Yeah, I think that
there are nuances in this.
I would certainly, as Caroline did, challenge the premise, but I know that it is a danger, because if your strategy to increase production is simply to increase numbers, you could have a problem on your hands. And that is what we're actually seeing at the moment. In response to increased demand in lower and middle income countries, we're seeing a different trend to the one which has provided increased protein in wealthier countries over the past 20 years. In other words, over the past 20 or even longer, 40 years in higher income countries, we're actually producing more per animal. What we're currently seeing in lower and middle income countries is an increase in animal numbers. And this is certainly true of the beef industry. I can't speak for the other industries. What we need to see is a transfer of some of the lessons learned in the wealthier countries where we managed to produce more per animal to those other countries. And rather than increasing the herd size, increase the productivity of the herd. Because it's only by doing that we can avoid the trap of using a crutch, for example, antimicrobials, and really improve the husbandry, the nutrition, the breeding management, so that we're producing, for example, in the beef industry, a calf every year, rather than having a large supporting herd producing a small number of calves. It's by doing these things that we can actually produce more from fewer animals and avoid the sort of technology trap of using things inappropriately.
Thank you. Do you have some more short one or long one, or?
We have a few more, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe we can take this question from Beate from Rwanda in Africa. And she's asking, could you elaborate on the most pressing issues that exacerbate AMR in the beef industry? Does the awareness of beef farmers about AMR seem promising? I don't know. Rory?
That sounds very rulish.
I take some notes.
Yeah, so There are two main types of antimicrobials used in the beef industry. There are tetracyclines and macrolides. And probably the one where the biggest concern is for human medicine is that macrolides are critically important for human medicine. But they're also critically important for animal health in certain production environments. Again, in order to reduce, refine, and replace the use of those macrolides, what we need to do is identify what is the issue. One of the main issues in feedlot cattle would be that of bovine respiratory disease. And in order to prevent bovine respiratory disease, we need to make sure that feedlot buyers are buying consistent batches of cattle, of well-backgrounded cattle that have been weaned well in advance and have preferably had a relatively short journey to a feedlot, so that all of the conditions are there. They've been vaccinated, etc. So all of the conditions are there that when they arrive, they're not stressed and they don't get bovine respiratory disease, which is not one organism. It's a complex disease. So what we need to do is make sure that when we're sourcing cattle, we're doing in such a way that we really reduce the danger of bringing that infection in. Reduce stress, make sure you've got a consistent batch of cattle that are well maintained up until the point that they're delivered. And that will mean that we don't have to use macrolides. I mean, of course, it's not a cast iron guarantee. We always need to monitor every batch of cattle. And when it's necessary, we will treat them. But we need to reduce our reliance on macrolides, and that's one of the ways of doing it.
Yeah, I think this is super important to spread the knowledge about these kind of management practices and how you organize the flow of animals. Is true for the pig sector as well. I think the poultry sector is very closed and well, or you're far better organized than the beef and pig sector. It's the principles are the same, and I think, I mean, you could mask these bad practices by extensive use of antibiotics. I think this is an area really where we can reduce the need for antibiotics if we manage to do this cleverly. And I think along the same line, even though I'm a veterinarian, we favor biosecurity, and you touched biosecurity here and vaccination. But this kind of basics, good animal husbandry, to have robust and healthy animals from the very beginning is very important, that we often forget in this conversation, I think. And that is, yeah, good farming and management and flow of animals.
Yeah, so good welfare.
Yeah, and welfare is a part of that, of course. Absolutely. But the thing is that these practices, maybe I preempt the discussion now, but I think these practices sometimes are more expensive than just adding more antibiotics. That is the bitter truth.
More complex, at least.
More complex,
yes.
Needing more skills.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, in the long term, it's more expensive if we get resistance, because then we won't have the drugs.
Precisely.
So,
I agree on that. Yeah.
Exactly.
But this is this long-term investment that we tend to forget about.
And this is part of a larger sustainability debate. How we produce food, we want to produce it in ways that have fewer negative impacts, and even reduce those to zero. Why not? Let's be really, really ambitious. Be truly a circular closed-loop cycle, at least in the production of food. That is a goal and a dream that I think can be attainable, but maybe it's very long term. And so this is a larger discussion about just the use of antimicrobials, but just the way we do farming. We are producing food at an industrial scale for a growing world population. It must be done in a way that is efficient. It must be done in a way that is economically viable for our farmers. Must be done in a way that businesses can survive. Must be done in a way in quantities that are sufficient to meet growing world demand. And all of these things are a difficult thing to meet simultaneously, all these challenges. But we have to do that. And so is it going to be more expensive than the easy solutions we had in the past using more antimicrobials or in crops using more pesticides. Well, it's a question that we have to ask ourselves: what are we prepared to do the right thing? And that is exactly this greater discussion on sustainability. And there's lots of room for improvement, I admit.
And that is a challenge for the individual farmer producer to take on that kind of responsibility in some way, because she or he is depending on
and it's
income.
a responsibility for all of us as consumers to be prepared to pay more expensive for something that costs more to produce.
Precisely. Something more, Sandra, from the cyberspace?
Yes, we could take a question from Peter Ballerstedt, and he's asking, given the current interruption of supply channels and emerging energy shortages impact on manufacturing, etc., is there a possibility of not obtaining the necessary antimicrobial agents needed for current food production systems?
Good question.
I don't.
Do anyone know or speculate?
I haven't heard, so I'll give it a shot. We are not monitoring, of course, veterinary medicine supply chain, because it's not for our association. They have their own association. But I have not made aware of any disruptions so far of veterinary medicine. I'm sorry, availability. Of course, the pandemic showed us, and the crisis we are living, and the delocalization of production in selected countries, where if you have a problem, you might have a disruption of the production chain. All of these have made the supply chain potentially more fragile. But so far, we haven't seen any disruption. An increase in price, of course, due to the pandemic, shipping cost and production cost and energy price are going up, even for veterinary medicine. But so far, and I think it's important, all the food system and veterinary medicine are a small part of it, but I want to enlarge this to the food system. Have reacted splendidly to the pandemic and to the increase of cost that we are seeing, because we have increase of cost of energy, increasing the cost of feed, increase the cost of veterinary medicine, increasing the cost of PVC, the film where you wrap your chicken breast, in our case, in. And most of these costs so far have been absorbed by companies instead of consumers. You haven't seen the same increase in prices, at least for chicken, in raw materials and final product. So, and the pandemic as well, with all the issues that have been globally, all food systems have reacted, have shown an incredibly high level of resilience. I think we have to acknowledge it.
When talking about this, about supply chains and alternatives, if you put it like that, to antibiotics, you touched upon it, Caroline, in your upcoming meeting in India, like herbal medicine, if I put it simply like that. What is your guess or take on that? I have an opinion, but I want to hear first what you're saying.
Trick question.
Caroline, what do you do?
I don't have a personal opinion, because I'm not the expert on it, but I think we need to go back to Rory's comment at the beginning. We're all a science-based organization. Like for everything related to animal health and welfare, at the end of the day, what's important, it's a science-based approach. And after that, when we have solution that makes an impact, then obviously we have a responsibility to look into it. I think that's, we just need to approach it in a way, because it's a slippery slope. It's easy to go back to discussion. I know we had those discussions in FAO of traditional medicine and traditional knowledge, and I'm always a bit careful again to bring back the science into that, because you can have like a personal experience, you can have an opinion, you can experiment different things, but after that, what it means in terms of the science approach, that I think that's also very important. So as I said, I think it's good that we have those discussions, that we explore and we discuss. And then we need to be open to all kind of solution that will make it better in the future. So.
No, I agree fully on that with you. And just to remind us that most of the pharmaceuticals, the first ones, and so they are kind of plant-based, if we put it like that. They are natural occurring substances. I think the trick is exactly what you are saying, Caroline, that these compounds or treatment regimes, they should be evaluated with the same rigor as any other pharmaceutical and so on. And it doesn't matter where they originate from. And if they are widely accessible, it's fine. But still, they should be exposed to the same scrutiny as other things. Otherwise, it creates a parallel universe based on wishful thinking and compassion.
Yes, I mean, just because it's natural, under brackets, what do you mean by natural, doesn't mean that it's not toxic or not safe.
Oh, that's
so be careful with that distinction. You know, curare is natural. Okay.
Penicillin was first synthesized by a fungi, so that was natural, which is brought into an industrial production system. But the point is about how effective it works and how safe it is for the product. You can have the best replacement for antibiotics of the world, which if it's toxic for the final product, you have no use for that. So again, being science-based and risk managed in your choices.
Should we take one more question, perhaps, if possible, before a convenience break, as the terminology goes?
Yes, we have a very active audience, so I can just go on and on here, but let's take one final one then. This is from Belainehe Mekonen. And the question is, it is well known that vaccines are tools to reduce AMR. Future prospects for the role of new vaccines in development to reduce AMR and challenges associated with future vaccine development to combat AMR still exist. So how to increase funding and resource mobilization for the development of new vaccines? In this regard, there is a disparity between developed and developing countries, as many of the infectious diseases are still endemic in developing countries. And sadly, there is low support for vaccine research. Also a big question.
That is a great question. And I wish I had a good answer for that. But, you know, I always come back because I have a very biased opinion. I think that we really need to increase the role of international institutions, to increase the funding. And I'm speaking specifically of the needs for our food systems to produce more food for more people. These are challenges that require more science, more funding. Just specifically on the vaccines, I want to be a bit optimistic. You know, we were able to develop a COVID vaccine in record time because there was this need to create one as quickly as possible. And now we have this new technology, an mRNA technology, which will have, I think we can safely say will have tremendous implications for all kinds of future treatments for all kinds of diseases. But certainly let's stay on topic and talk about, you know, vaccines for the future. Very worthwhile areas, no-brainers really, to increase investment and really to increase public investment. I think this is really something that we really do need to do on behalf of all society. Who exactly should do that? That's a very big discussion. I'm not qualified to answer that question. But a great question. I really,
I think it's a very hard question to answer, but want to acknowledge this very unfair inequality in the world when it comes to vaccine development for those diseases that are not present in the richer part of the world. I think, for instance, the African swine fever, I think that since that is threatening the European market and other richer market nowadays, I think the investment in vaccine development there has increased and boosting a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's I cannot agree more with this question. It's true, and there are some donations or funders that are focusing on this, and there are also institutes working specifically with this kind of diseases, which is a step forward, and so. But it's a very sad thing.
Yeah.
I agree.
Sorry if I may, just very quickly, we do need to take a very holistic approach, and vaccines won't solve all our problems. And I just want specifically to refer to African swine fever, as the chair just referred to that. Developing a vaccine is important, of course, but it will not solve the problem. Will not solve the problem unless you are planning to vaccinate every wild boar and every wild animal that's a potential vector of African swine fever. The solution is we need to contain it, and you need to keep it out of your backyard. Having a vaccine will not solve the problem. I repeat, it will not solve the problem.
It will mitigate, but not
It will mitigate, it will help in some circumstances with financial losses, etc. Understand that, but that is not going to solve the problem. And there is a whole program of work on how to prevent the spread of ASF at the OIE. So
yeah.
If I may help, can I just add something? I think as global organization and as GASL as well, we have a responsibility to identify gaps. And when we feel that more research is needed or more investment is needed, we should be vocal about it. I think that's an opportunity, and it's about vaccine, but it could be about anything else that we feel is necessary in order to deliver on our mandate. And also we have the FAO subcommittee on livestock, and they've also taken that subject of interest. So I think we have an opportunity to share with governments from around the world what we feel also are needed in a way to move forward. So I would say keep that on your report so that we can also have like messages that we want to share in terms of actions that are needed in the future.
Yeah, I think GASL is a good body for promoting this. With these words of consensus in a true GASL mood, I think we take some 10-15 minutes. We reconvene in 15 minutes from now, having coffee or whatever you want to do, and see you then in 15 minutes from now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. We had some delicious, strong espressos here in Rome, and so we are ready to continue. And this question or so relates to what we are discussing, but I want to turn to you, Caroline, a little bit. If you balance the role of legalization, national or private veterinary service, the public health sector, the feed and pharmaceutical industry, the retailers and consumers of animal source foods, which are the most important ones, or are they entirely complementary and all needed or so? But for instance, the pharmaceutical and the feed industry, we haven't touched that much on them. How do you see their role in fighting AMR? Please, Caroline.
Thank you. I would say that everybody has an important role to play. Definitely, if we talk about research, as we've discussed just before the break, I would say that clearly pharmaceuticals have a role to play, as well as government in funding as well the research. But I would say that the sector also have an important role to play, because you don't do research in abstract, you do it depending on needs and the bonding of reality and evolution of reality. So those connections are very important. Thus, the importance of working together. And what's important in that collaboration as well is finding a way to engage the farmer, because at the end of the day, the farmer is in the barn. That's where it's happening. And you know, it's like for climate change, farmer is always upfront of all those challenges, and we need to motivate, inspire, but engage them as well. So I think every of those actors have also a role to play in that farmer's motivation, in convincing them that that reduction is important, that change is part of the solution for them as a business person, small or big. You know, every farm is a business, whatever it's a small one or a big one, and answering the needs of what the consumer wants, and having the best quality product. So it's really a whole, and a collaboration is key, because everybody has a role to play. We could talk about the veterinarian as well. They have an important role to play because they work directly with farmers, and often they're the one who makes recommendation, and that's why it's important to educate and engage them as well, because at the end of the day, their advice are also listened to by farmers, and it's important that they are in the loop because they have a very important impact. And I want to thank Tin for mentioning it, because it is important. We haven't mentioned it enough. The role of veterinarians, they're key to the treatment of animals, to their prevention of disease, but there are too less of them. And even in developed country, veterinarians in rural area are not easy to find. So that's definitely, if we were talking earlier before the break of gaps, things that we should put attention on. Training veterinarian, having veterinarian in different countries around the world, making sure they can support the farmers appropriately. This is actually something we should definitely pinpoint as being an important element.
I should not be an advocate for veterinarians and so, but there are some interesting, how to put it, phenomenons, studies that has been studied in Europe, for instance, that younger veterinarians are more considerate or more prudent in using antibiotics or prescribing antibiotics than older ones. So it's a matter of, I think, more modern education versus the older ones, and there are also geographic differences in the awareness of antimicrobial resistance. Again, within Europe, between veterinary students in different parts of Europe, and then also there is a phenomenon that in some settings, veterinarians do earn a lot of money, or their revenue to a large extent comes from selling or promoting antibiotics. Sin, do you have a take on that? You were praising veterinary service before. Is the veterinary service always perfect? I dare to say this.
Yes.
Being a veterinarian myself.
That's right. Of course, who is going to dare to claim that their profession is always perfect? And certainly the delicate question that you posed, should veterinarians and selling medicines, is that a good idea? And so I have an economist background, and they call, in common language, we call that a problem with incentives, right? Yes. So I think everybody understands that very clearly. So is that a good idea? I'm asking the question. I don't want to, I'm not here to make a judgment on anything, but we do need to ask the question: what is the best way, the most efficient way, reasonable way to dispense veterinary advice and to provide the medicines?
Yeah.
Yeah. that is also a question for human medicine as well. It's not just something for the animal industry. And let me also remind us all that antimicrobial resistance is also a problem for antimicrobial use in people. So let's keep this global perspective in mind. But let me just say that, look, and again, I know that I'm repeating and harping on this global strategy, because we are not going to win the fight against antimicrobial resistance if we only just do it for the countries that can afford to do it, and then the other countries that can't afford to do it would say, well, that's we don't worry about them. No, we need to be all in this together. And the way we can be in this together, at least at the global level, is to have more support to our international institutions that then provide the help to the countries that can less afford it. And how is that help provided? We have had a global strategy to do this since 2015. And of course, discussions before that, but 2015 was when the international agreement, the One Health approach was agreed to. And just recently, we added another member to the One Health group. It's not a tripartite, 3 international organizations, now 4 international organizations. We've just recently added the UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, to the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the World Organization for Animal Health, of course, as concerns livestock in particular. That is the primary the leading institution for global animal health, and that program is basically the global strategy that consists of developing awareness and the science. I think we've talked enough about that. The importance to strengthen the surveillance and research so the surveillance to be able to measure, have statistics. The research always important, as was discussed before, and then we have to invest in the governance and capacity building. Who is doing what in what context, what country, and then of course finally all of this leads to the implementation of these standards, of these global standards, depending on the country, on the region, on the circumstance. So there is this global strategy that exists. We just need to be more invested in it.
Are you for this competition or pre-competitive thinking? Are you in favor of strong global regulations for trade and regulations, so use of antibiotics and so?
Again, as I said earlier, I want to make a very strong distinction between a global standard and the regulations. Okay. So the global standard is what we are all aspiring to, what we all agree to, every country agreed to sign on to. That's a global standard. The regulations are how each country is interpreting that global standard will be met in their country. And some countries that have decided, because their population have decided they want a higher standard than the global standard, they are free to do that. Those countries that cannot afford to do that and say, well, actually, it's more important that we feed hungry people in our country, and then after we feed hungry people, then we are going to worry about these other things. So everybody, according to their circumstance, is going to decide what regulatory mechanisms and what level they're going to regulate at. So the distinction, global standard and the regulatory framework. Yes.
But do you see a development of, I would say, higher international standards that affects the global trade, or up to the standards of the Canadian regulations, if I put it like that? Is there such a trend, and is that desirable?
So there is a very big discussion about what are the standards that you need to apply to international trade. And now we're moving to international trade. It's largely on the commodity, so on the product, the end product. And now we're moving basically from the animal production side to the trade of goods side. This is where the Codex Alimentarius comes in, the world's food safety authority. And the Codex Alimentarius has had discussions, on AMR, for example. They are now in the 8th task force for AMR. And each task force takes a few years to discuss, and then there is a few years back. So we've been discussing this for a long time. And the Codex Alimentarius, as most of us know, is there to make the regulations on food safety standards that every country should be following in order to be compliant with a global trading system.
Yep.
Yes, okay, so yes, absolutely, very important. That mechanism is also there. Let me just make a comment on that. It's very hard going because not everybody has the same opinion.
Yeah.
On,
As usual.
yeah, exactly. You know, you mentioned earlier the precautionary principle. To be a bit a caricature, that's very much a European thing. And if you're talking about a North American aspect, we'd like to more focus on the science, evidence-based aspect. And so there is this discussion, evidence-based versus precautionary principle. It can sometimes be a very difficult debate.
Yeah.
So if it was an easy problem to solve, we would have solved it a long time ago. Yeah. So
May I go back to the veterinary service and the role of or to generate incomes from veterinarians, and turning to you, Ruri, from the producer's perspective, if I put it like that, is it a challenge to get farmers paying for advice on biosecurity, on good practices, and so the kind of extension service without pharmaceuticals? And so I'm thinking about the parallel when we go to the doctor and want something for our gastritis. Of course, we have a stressful lifestyle, drinking too much espresso, sleeping too less, and so. And the doctor says, "Oh well, you have to change your lifestyle." And you say, "No, I want a pill." And you're getting the omeprazole so you can continue with your unhealthy lifestyle. Is it? How easy is it to get farmers to pay for advices compared to pharmaceuticals, if I put it like that?
Well, of course, people want an immediate solution to a problem, and you know, you could refer to that as a sticking plaster over a cut. But the long-term solution is going to be the one which is structural and that prevents disease and that avoids constant use of antimicrobials. You know, and many countries have an extension service that is provided in some way or another, subsidized by the state, but not all countries do. And it's interesting, I currently live in New Zealand, where there's very little state support for livestock production. And it's interesting to see that producers there are very commercially oriented, and they are very keen to pay for advice because good advice saves you money. So I would say that it takes a bit of time for people to understand that, but once they've got that message, they will actually be more willing to pay for advice than a simple sticking plaster.
Do you agree on this, Nicola, or is the, if we stick to our profession, the veterinary profession, are we able to provide these qualified advices? Is the veterinary training suitable for that? What do you think? Or are we still with the syringe or the pills?
I think, well, I take the example of Italy because I don't know veterinary schools outside Italy. You have several veterinary faculty in Italy. You have those who are more pet oriented and those who are more livestock oriented. For sure, the university should be able to give veterinary the most updated training possible and set of information possible. Sometimes when university is training a veterinarian, you can be livestock veterinarian, pet veterinarian, you can work in the feed industry, you can work as a surgeon, you can do a lot of things. So potentially pushing students to choose their path, not at the beginning of their career at the university, but let's say in the middle, would have the university to provide them with more specific information. So this as a generic statement. But for the rest, I think that, of course, you also have your professional career. So you start working in the beef industry or in the poultry industry, and you build your background.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, the role of veterinarian is important, but the veterinarian itself, they have to question themselves. They have to push themselves to be always on top of topics and to invest on their education and training. So my answer is yes. I think veterinarians are able to do that. But it's important they stay on top of topics.
Then I thank you so much. Then I see a question here from our chair of the GASL, Shirley Taravalli. Should we pick that one?
Yeah, sure.
To keep her happy?
Yeah, okay. First of all, she says, congratulations on a great discussion, including highlighting the roles of multi-stakeholder partnerships, the various industry associations and GASL in this complex and at times controversial space. And her question then, how to better engage outside of the livestock sector with the human and public health, perhaps environmental health too? Is that the quadripartite or are there other opportunities?
Caroline, do you have a take on this?
I always have a take on everything, you know me. I would say that's an interesting question because yes, we want to reach out outside of livestock, but what does that mean outside of livestock? Are we talking reaching out to animal activists, or are we talking out, or we want to reaching out outside of the sector? I think that is important because if you take the, for example, in IDF, our role is not to talk with consumer. We communicate with regulators, with influencers, with international organization, with our stakeholders, with farmers, with researcher, but it's not our job to communicate to the general public. But we do participate to some project when people are doing it. For example, you know that OIE, WOHA, organize every year the Antibiotic Awareness Week. That's a major campaign that is broad, general public, it touches everybody. And that's something that we contribute to because it is a way of reaching out to people that are outside of our, like I would say, community. Second, another example, we've worked with or collaborated to a project that's called Disarm Project. It was a European project to communicate about antimicrobial, and it's very difficult to pronounce, to discuss about AMR and how to disseminate innovative solution for antibiotic resistance management. So we contributed to that project, develop videos, try to share knowledge and communicate about that topic. So those, I think, are activities we could join that are maybe organized by others when we can reach out a bit outside of our traditional public. But at the end of the day, I think like everything for communication and reaching out and engagement, we need to be clear on what's the objective, with whom we want to talk, and so make sure that we target that engagement.
Thank you so much. Ruri, what is your, do you have any ideas how to reach out outside our circles, the classical livestock circles, whatever kind we are? Is it meaningful, or is it, and how do we do that in a sensible way? Because I guess that you have been facing this in various.
Yeah, I mean, while I think that is probably important, I think the structures are there with the quadripartite group, and at national levels they have similar infrastructure. I think for us it's really important that we look into our own industry and are doing the best we can do within our own industry. I don't want to have to engage with veterinarians for pets, for example, also a significant user of antimicrobials, or human medicine, because those guys know their own business as we know our business. My feeling is that for our association, we need to do the best that we can do. We need to communicate what we're doing outside, but I don't feel the urgent need to increase communication with all of those other groups, because I think those mechanisms already exist. I wouldn't presume to know better than the quadripartite group and national equivalents to that.
But you see the need for the interface to.
Yeah, there is, but I don't think our association is capable of providing any better solutions than already exist. I think those mechanisms are there, and we need to use them as they are.
Okay, Shin.
Well, I think that it's a tough question. You know, the question about the consumers, you know, is often asked: should we be communicating to consumers? And you know, I have to admit that our association was never conceived to have a branch or an arm specialized in communicating with the consumer. But it's a fair question to ask, and the reason I'm, sort of trying to get my mind around that now is because there are some of these global discussions in which the average consumer is impacting on us. And I give you a recent example, the Food System Summit. I think one could argue that in addition to the activists and the usual people that we interact with, that the average consumer saw through that, global discussion at the United Nations, that there was somehow this need to have this communication. And I think that to answer Shirley's question, looking outside our circle, I think we do need to seriously think about how GAZO is better equipped to interface with things like the Food System Summit, because there will be a future one, I'm sure, whatever it's called, some version of that. COP27 is coming up. I know we have plans about that, and we need to more and more be engaged in those discussions, because the Conference of the Parties, the climate change negotiations, will more and more focus on agriculture, and they for sure, once they focus on agriculture, will be focusing in on livestock. And even last year, when we talked about the methane pledge, which was not directly targeted to livestock, certain groups immediately went to the livestock discussion. So I think that we need to be aware, not only, not to be aware, but to be thinking strategically about how we better engage in this. So from a personal bias viewpoint, I think we absolutely need to be an important part of that discussion on Food System Summit.
Okay. Thank you. Carolyn, you announced that you had a change in your schedule, so you have to leave at 4 o'clock. So do you want some? You have some minutes here if you want to share some final wisdom with us how IDF is fighting AMR. If you want to do a final statement, you're welcome.
I don't know if if it's wisdom or not, but I think it's a good discussion. And as you said earlier, it's always good to have a regular discussion like that and engagement with the group as well. There's a lot of interaction, and we can see the importance of that topic. And that's why we keep it on the top of mind, and we've included in our major events. So we'll make sure we continue always to be on the top of the science and on top of our priority. I would say that for those who are interested to learn more about what we do in the dairy sector, we've published many tools, from guidelines. We have animal health report where we publish case study. So you can find a lot of information on our website, and contact us if you need more. But I would say that the dairy sector is engaged. I think that's the main message I want to leave here, that the sector is engaged. And we'll continue to follow the latest science and making sure that we adapt and providing the tools that our stakeholders need, because at the end of the day, we're not the one making the difference on the ground. I know our farmers are, and people that are involved every day. So our job is to make sure that we nourish those people with the relevant science they need, and expertise and inspiration and ideas on how they can do better. So that would be my message, that we continue to do our role in providing that for them, and using GAZO, as you mentioned, to continue that promotion, maybe externally to our community, to see how we can how we can collaborate with others in continuing the discussion. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And if there's any further question later, you can send them to me by email. I'll be sure that I can answer to them.
Thank you, Caroline, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Sandra, thank you. Bye-bye. Do we have some questions from the...
Yes, we have one question. Again, from Muenda Mbaka from Kenya, who wants to go back to this question about willingness to pay for good advice. And the question is, majority of the farmers in Africa are small scale and they produce about 80% of the food consumed. They cannot afford good quality professional veterinary advice. And since the structural adjustment programs in the 80s, veterinary services are mostly privatized in Africa. And so extension services are mostly not readily available. How do we tackle the issue of the inaccessibility to the good value professional advice in a community which cannot afford the service, and yet we aspire to tackle AMR from support by professionals?
Another hard one. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I can try.
Uri, please.
Thanks. So part of my background is that I worked for several years in Southern Africa, not in East Africa. And I also worked for several years in Afghanistan, running a para-veterinary support program there. And it's true that veterinarians not only cost money, but in countries like Afghanistan, we tended to find that they weren't willing to live in the remote villages. So you could find some veterinarians in major cities like Herat, Kabul, Kandahar, and Mazar-i-Sharif, but not where most of the livestock was, which was out in the villages and on pasture. So our solution there was to train para-veterinarians. We set up a number of training institutes around the country where we took people from those villages and they received each 6 months of training and were equipped with vaccines and basic veterinary medicines and a rudimentary cold chain based on cold boxes and ice storage and things like that. And they went back to their villages and they practiced as paravets, and they charged for their services. Vaccines were given out free of charge and subsidized by the European Union in this case. And medicines were paid for by the paravets and sold along with advice to the people in the community. And what we found was that if we adopted a herd health approach where you have a whole village vaccinating all at once, the larger producers with more animals would support the smaller ones simply because they wanted that herd immunity. And we also found that people were willing to pay. Now, we're not talking large amounts of money here. We're talking about relatively small transactions with the paravets in the village, but sufficient over the course of the year that it was worth the paravet continuing to do that, providing them veterinary advice and keeping up his supply of vaccines and medicines. So there is a sort of happy medium somewhere to be found, and it'll be different in each country what that looks like. But I would say paravets are one of the tools, and I know that in Kenya there have been paravets and there have been community animal health workers, which is an even step down level of training. So those are the alternatives that we need to be looking at in countries where we just don't have the supply of vets in the rural areas, I would suggest.
I agree on this, but I think one of the challenges is when the project is over, when the donor community pulls back, are these viable solutions? Are the farmers able to pay because there's still a cost, or is the government system willing to subsidize? I think, and I guess that we don't have any answer really for that. But if we are very successful, the responsible politicians should say, oh, well, this is a fantastic model, or do you have a comment?
Yeah, I definitely do. And it's maybe something most people would find counterfactual. But what we found in Afghanistan was that when funding increased, it increased the level of support to paravets. We found that the system actually became less sustainable, because when paravets were used to being given more by the project, they were less willing to go back to the small transactions that they had previously undertaken. So there's a very concrete example. Between the 1980s and the early 2000s in Afghanistan, there was relatively little project support to Afghanistan, sufficient to run the training centers, sufficient to import veterinary medicines and vaccines, but not sufficient to pay the paravets any kind of a salary. They really had to work to make those transactions pay them. Subsequently, with the American and Allied occupation of Afghanistan, the amount of funding increased astronomically, and there was suddenly a large pressure to spend money, and there were donors who said it was unethical not to pay paravets, and everybody needed to have a salary, and it needed to be paid in US dollars. And that happened. And when that funding dried up, we had a serious problem on our hands, because the paravets said, well, if you're not going to pay me $100 a month, why would I do it? Yeah. And actually, that's an analog to their own traditional system of maintaining waterways. They've maintained underground waterways for centuries. And then when a program paid people to start maintaining these, and then the program finished, they went into disrepair. Yeah. So you've got to be really careful about how you fund things to keep them sustainable.
Yeah. Good words. Thank you. Do we have some more?
Not for now.
Not for now. If I turn to you, Jin, you have opinions about this, but how do we make producers investing more in, if we agree on that, investing more in preventive measures, not including antibiotics, instead of using antibiotics for disease prevention? Is this an issue of consumers' pressure or willingness of pay? Is it a regulatory thing, or is it a market thing? What do you think?
So I think all of that is part of the mix, and of course all of that is very different depending on the country. And so in a very highly regulated environment like the European Union, we see very clearly, the role of the state in setting, let's say, higher than the world average standard for things like animal welfare and antimicrobial use, etc. But does that produce a superior result than what another country with another approach would achieve? I think is an open-ended question. But the point is that in most cases, I believe, this is a societal choice that you make, because there are trade-offs. I'm afraid there are trade-offs in life. You cannot have everything. And so if we are going to have better animal welfare in terms of less livestock density in our production systems, so in common language, we have more free range, for example, other things, that has a cost. And we have, well, I'm sorry to borrow an example from our egg colleagues, but we have actually a very successful example of that with eggs. In the marketplace, at least in the European Union, and I think in many countries you can find that, you go to a supermarket and you can find eggs of different qualities at different prices. Yeah. And I don't need to remind people that, free range eggs cost more than, those that are where the animals, there is more animal density and more confined, and consumers make a choice. They pay the price difference, and that actually works quite reasonably successfully, I say. I'm able to afford free range eggs, so I pay more. Yeah. I'm not able to afford it, I buy the cheaper eggs. Okay, all right. So it's a societal choice that we make. and there are trade-offs. So I know I'm skirting around the issue of, you asked the question of how do you encourage the producer to do a certain thing? Well, no, I think it's the other way around. The producer has to be able to make a living, and he has to be able to make a living based on the price that he can get for the output. And the price that he can get for the output is based on what the consumer is willing to pay. And if the consumer is not willing to pay very much, then I'm afraid that
No change.
you have to accept that that is how it's going to be produced.
Yeah, I agree on that.
So,
Nicola, may I turn to you a similar question? The interface between animal welfare and antimicrobial use / antimicrobial resistance. Do you have any reflections on that from the poultry industry? I mean, the poultry industry, I think, is the most biosecure, most standard operation procedures, and at the same time, it's quite a dense population, large operations that some consumers think is very industrial, if I put it like that. How do you see the connection with AMR and animal welfare? Is there a connection at all?
Well, I wouldn't talk about connection between AMR and animal welfare. I would like more to see it as a connection between AMR and flock management. Because animal welfare, it's multifactorial. It's not just, I know that Shin took it as an example. Animal welfare is not density. And the EFSA, the European Food Safety Agency, is moving away from that concept. We come from an era where animal welfare was more related to density than to animal welfare indicators, which is now the let's say, dominant approach to that. So I prefer to link the AMR to flock management, which is made by nutrition, biosecurity, flock management, building, and animal welfare. So of course, animal welfare, it's a part of the flock management. Of course, it has an impact on AMR. But if you take the poultry industry, poultry meat industry, and we take into account the density, what they say it's overcrowded. But it's overcrowded. You base your judgment on what? Chickens are animals that naturally tend to group, because the group is defending them from predators. So if you give them twice the space they have, they will probably end up being in the same corner altogether, because that is how they behave. But if you look at feed intake, water intake, food pad lesion, litter quality, that is the assessment of the welfare and the management of the flock. So if you have a good management of the flock, of course, your need for antibiotics, in that case of medication, will probably decrease. And for the poultry industry, how do we push producer to invest more in flock management? Well, Mother Nature reminds us to do that. We have the example of influenza, that every year or two reminds you that you have to invest in prevention, you have to invest in biosecurity, you have to invest in all those actions that really prevent you to have the big disruption that is a disease. Even influenza does not require treatment, so we know that it's totally different story, but it's a good example for the poultry industry that Mother Nature's remind you if you are acting good or not in your industry.
Thank you, Nicole.
Let me just quickly apologize for my comments about density and fully endorse what Nicole's more appropriate description of that. But also to react a little bit to what you said about industrialized production. Is that a bad thing? And let me remind us all that this watch that I'm wearing and this iPad that I have in front of me, these are all products of industrialization. Is it because it's produced in an industrial manner that is necessarily a good or a bad thing? So I want to be a little bit sensitive to that discussion.
But I saw our chair's point, and Well, I take his statement, and I know that most of the people look at, particularly the poultry industry, as the most industrialized sector. If you take the processing of poultry meat, that is probably 100% true. We are the most industrialized producing sector. When it comes to farms, well, I don't see much different from poultry farms to beef or pork. Our farmers, we as a sector, we take care of our animal, we raise them the best way possible, because first of all, we have to do that, and second, because it's in our interest to do that. So I would like to divide the primary production from the further processing.
Yeah, I should, given your reaction there, Chin, I want to clarify the wording or the value of industrial animal production.
I want to sell you a free-range iPad.
No, but I mean it's used in a negative way.
Yeah.
It's an element of not being humane, etc. You think about machines rather than living beings. So I think that's how I try to use it or distinguish, and I think we are on the same page there. I think we should try to wrap up this around the table a little bit. So if we start with you, Nicola, what is your wish list, if you're allowed to make, say, 3 things that you think would be the most efficient ones from your branch side in reducing the risk of the further emergence of antimicrobial resistance? If you say 3 things.
From our side, first of all, is 100% creating awareness and never stopping creating awareness. There's always need to let people at various stages of the value chain to be aware of the issue, of the risk, and of the possible solution. As IPC, we in 2017 and 2019, we tried to, let's say, align our industry. We produced an antimicrobial US stewardship principle and best practice to reduce the use for antimicrobials. And in 2021, IPC, together with other 3, Cargill, Ausvet, and IFER International, we have been selected for a project funded by USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. That is the first ever 100% private project, and it's wrapped around IPC antimicrobial stewardship. And the idea is to have the whole poultry industry globally to adopt and endorse the principles that are included in IPC antimicrobial stewardship. So we then have a specific focus on Kenya, on Indonesia, Vietnam, and India. So where we go more in depth with program for training farmers and software development for tracking the use of antimicrobials. But first of all, creating awareness. And here is where our association can play a major role.
Okay.
Second is for sure looking for partnership, like this one I just mentioned, the Transform, which stands for Transformational Strategies for farm output risk mitigation. I'm sorry, it's really complicated. Looking for partnership, because that helps you to go deeper into the ground, particularly in those countries where the sector is less accessible. If you think at North America, South America for the poultry industry, and Europe, it's not that difficult. But when it comes to Far East or some African countries, it's very difficult to go deep in the ground. So you have an organization like the UAE, the FAO, or the USAID that can help you bringing your know-how at a deeper level on the ground. And last point, which should be the first one, as I said, again, science basis and risk evaluation and management of all your decision, going from resource allocation to countries where have a particular project or not. You always have to be sure, particularly in those days, that you are managing your resources correctly and you are basing your decision on science.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rory, 3 points.
Yep. I'll be repurposing Nicolo's comments because essentially I think we're all looking for the same thing. We need to be able to invest in countries where this has not been a priority for whatever reason that is, to enable rolling out of best practices, to enable surveillance, because just because there is no concern in a country, that may be that there's no express concern because there simply isn't the knowledge of what's currently there. So surveillance would be one thing to invest in. Investing in knowledge sharing and enabling producers to meet best practices is another one, so that we can basically all refine and reduce and replace antimicrobials wherever possible, so that we're using as little as possible, but as much as is necessary. I want to make that clear. We still will need antimicrobials in livestock. We need to use as much as is necessary to ensure good welfare, but we want to use as little as possible.
Thank you. It's very clear. Chin?
Yeah, prudent use of antimicrobial resistance. I think that's what Rory was just describing. That's also, I think, how Nicolo and Caroline would agree with me. As little as possible, as much as necessary, based on science, as we all, I believe, agree. But what is the science? Because that seems like such a simple thing to support, and there is a huge discussion, actually, this ongoing discussion at the Codex Alimentarius on what is a science-based decision. I just want to alert people to that it sounds like a good thing already, but the devil is in the details. And so I'm referring to this discussion about risk-based analysis versus precautionary principle versus, and these are all scientific terms. So science, really important. So yes, support that, but be aware that we need to that there is this discussion about the detail. The surveillance and the research, of course, if we are not able to monitor and research, and these are all things already that are being done in the international institutions, but we must ask the question, is enough being done? Because funding is limited. And if not enough is being done, and some of my colleagues have alluded to this, then are there other mechanisms? Is it up to the private sector, ask this as a question, to step in and say, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do, to help to do this? I don't know, I'm asking the question, but it's maybe a question that we need to ask, because as more of a global community, if we want to ensure that we have a sustainable food production system around the world, maybe we need to help each other a little bit more. It's a question I'm asking. Maybe I'm being a little bit too philosophical here, but we are all thinking about our own interests in our own country and our own production systems. Maybe we need to think a little bit larger, even in the private sector, about what we can do. And I know that the private sector does a lot of investment and work to help developing countries, etc. I'm not saying that that's not the case. There are many good examples of that, but I'm asking the question, is there a greater role required for this, specifically in the case of antimicrobial resistance, which seems to be a very, very wicked problem, another economist term for those of you that are economists, that we need to solve for many countries which they're not able to afford to do this for whatever reason, for reasons, government's reasons. Government usually is that's the nub of the problem. Can they afford to? Or do they have other things that they feel that? Anyway, I'm getting a bit philosophical here, but just say that, this is a global problem. It's a shared responsibility. We all need to be part of the solution. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And my own take on this from today's conversation, and also from previous experience, if I put it like that, coming from the university. Of course, I believe in science-based decisions, but as you pointed out, Shin, that's a nice statement, but it's a lot of aspects or dimensions in that, and I think we have to acknowledge that. But to really aim for true science-based decisions is a very good way, I think. And then more practically, I think we indeed have to come away from poor biosecurity, poor animal management, and poor husbandry. That is hidden by an umbrella of excessive use of antibiotics, either as growth promoters or regular prevent disease prevention in certain periods in life. I think if we could practice other preventive measures and reduce the risk of disease, then we could really reduce the use of antibiotics. And as Rory said, that it's we really need antibiotics to treat sick animals and not distribute it all over. I think that is not responsible at all. And I think we are heading in the right direction, but there are differences in progress around the world and around also different economic settings. So with these words, I want to thank the panel for a good conversation, and I want to thank you out there in the cyberspace, listening and conveying questions via you, Sandra. I think they were very interesting, and this was a kind of experimental thing. We had this roundtable conversation rather than being on different screens in an ordinary webinar, and we hope that you enjoy that. And on behalf of GASL and our hosting institution FAO here, I want to thank you all in saying goodbye from us.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you. We can close now.